what looked back at me this time was another massive change to my body. I knew I felt lighter, but the amount of muscle that was now on me was insane. I had effectively put on twice the muscle mass, if not more, than before. That wasn't meant to rhyme. It was to the point that, had my hide not been as thick, I'm sure I would have been seeing veins popping out like those powerlifter folks. That wasn't all. My jaw and neck muscles had also increased in a clearly defined way. The muscles around my jawline had truly gained mass. I opened my mouth to see what was inside. It had not changed, so I grabbed my hair clippers, doubting I would need them again, and proceeded to bit them in half. Spitting out the metal end, I could even believe what I was seeing. Being my new size, I had to crouch down even further to get a good look at my head and shoulders. That is when I felt something very strange. It was like my spine had grazed against the wall, but I wasn't even close to it. Turning my body, I nearly fainted as I could see a tail coming out of me. Grabbing the wall to make sure I didn't drop to my knees, I examined it. The tail was clearly reptilian in nature, with segmented scales like the rest of my body. It had a slight ridge going down the dorsal side, and it almost looked like a young crocodile, though not as striking on top. Though the rest of it resembled that of a snake. Gaining my composure, I moved it around a little, and I was surprised how easy it was to control. Being about 4 feet long, it didn't take long before I could grasp and move items with ease. Don't know if this would come in handy, but for now, my mind moved on to something else. Food. Though I didn't want to, I broke open my emergency rations and tried to prepare them. This is when I remembered that I was out of water. Well, sort of. There may be nothing coming out of the gravity feed filter, but the tap still worked. I cringed at the idea of drinking straight from the tap. I had seen multiple creatures living in ponds outside and wasn't keen on the idea of contaminated water coming out of the faucet. Would say I just grinned and bared it, but don't think I can grin. After refilling the gravity feed and eating far more than just one meal, I began a process of collecting as much water and other supplies as I could. I knew the power would go out eventually. In fact, I was surprised that it lasted this long. After filling any and all containers of water, I moved on to the inventory in my apartment. After about an hour, I found out I didn't have much I could use anymore. None of my clothes fit outside of my sweatshirt and pants. These were a bit tight on me, and I had to rip a hole in the back to make room to fit my new tail through. I didn't need clothing for protection anyway, but just to feel a little human again, it was nice. Although I wasn't shy about my body before all this happened, which is probably why I was able to move so freely. I have enough bedding to take care of me when the winter weather turns cold. When I was looking at the blankets, I suddenly thought, am I cold-blooded now? I checked my temperature and it was low at 91.8 degrees Fahrenheit, but not so much I would have to worry. I took a deep breath of relief, and that one was one. I brought all the items of use into my bedroom on the second floor. I guess you could call it my den or maybe my lair. Still had a few weapons, but now my hands are too big to use them correctly, which was the main reason why I gave away my .45. Just firing it was difficult, and I could feel the slide grazing my hand each time. It would have just been a matter of time before it ripped my hands open. Found myself cursing that my long guns weren't in my hunting cabin. At that thought, I started laughing. You see, my cousin was one of those prepper guys. He was the one that bought me the emergency food. Well, have to thank him when I see him, or if. He designed the inside of the cabin. If someone breaks in and doesn't know what they're looking for, all they would find is a room with a couple of beds, tables, chairs, and a small kitchen. All the good stuff is either under the floorboards or in compartments in the walls. Continuing my inventory, I pulled out my camping gear, not realizing that I had left some snacks in it. Would like to say that I was able to ration it for later. Damn this incessant hunger. I shrugged as I threw the hiking boots onto the side and looked through all the extra items. I doubted I would be able to fit in any that two-person tent now. so that went off to the side. I kept the first aid kit for sure, along with the hygiene kit. The GPS might come in handy, and so would the foldable shovel. Pretty much all the socks and other clothing are essentially useless to me now. As much as it pained me to put the down jacket to the side, I could barely get my hand through it, let alone the rest of my arm. All in all, I have all the long-term items I would need, though I have to focus much more on a pressing concern. Food. The old trick for satiating hunger was drinking a lot of water. It doesn't work for very long, but it does work. The filter was barely keeping up with my thirst, and it was getting annoying. I thought about it while I had some lunch, taking another large percentage of my rapidly depleting rations. I didn't want to go outside in the middle of the day and just start breaking down doors. This is how a lot of others got smoked. Plus, any other creatures would follow me back to my lair and raid it while I was out collecting. So, what do? Looking out the window, I could see that most of the vehicles were gone. The only ones left for this building were mine and the old guy at the far end. So, if I can't go around, I would have to go through. I started by knocking rhythmically on the wall between my apartment and the next. I figured that would get a response after a few minutes if someone was there. After about 10 minutes of no response, I began to pull the drywall apart. With my new power, it didn't take long before I was breaking the 2x4s in order to fit through. When I stuck my head through, I actually asked, "Is anyone home?" I know, noise discipline. Though with all the breaking wood, I doubt it mattered much at that moment. I made it into their apartment and moved around silently. Obviously, I started with the kitchen. They must have left in a hurry since there was still food on the table. Plates of eggs and bacon sat around half-eaten. A lot of the kitchen, dining room, and living room looked completely untouched. After clearing the plates, I moved to the refrigerator and the cupboards. If I could smile, I'm sure I would have, since they were both filled. The freezer itself was nearly empty, though. I figured they must have cleared it before they left. Regardless, I began the process of transferring all the food to my place. Afterwards, I moved to the bedrooms. Walking up the stairs, I looked up to see a family photo. I stopped mid-stride as I looked at it. My eyes focused on the mother, and my heart sank to my feet. She was the one that had bled out that the gator had attacked. How did I not recognize her sooner? Her rotund face smiled at me as I slowly made my way past it. With much less vigor, I went into the bedrooms and started raiding what I could. There wasn't much I could get out of the children's room, but there was a few items in the parents' room I could use, mainly blankets and alike. Their bathroom was a good supply of hygiene items I could use as well. When it was time to start knocking on the wall, all I could find myself thinking was about how I hoped they had gotten somewhere safe. This process continued for the next 2 apartments. With only 2 more left down this row, I would have to go to the other side tomorrow. When I opened the wall to the next apartment, I could smell something awful. Ugh. I took my time cutting through the apartment and used a mirror I found to check the area out before moving in. With it clear, I crawled in and began to look around. The place was a mess. Not a mess like you had left in a hurry, but like somebody had been trapped in there and tore the place apart in order to get out. Moving around, I found it difficult to keep from extending my claws due to sheer tension. The kitchen and living room had been torn apart. The fridge had been left open long enough for the motor to burn out, and all the food was just gone, either removed or completely unusable. The cupboards were busted open, from some of them torn clean off the walls. The couch was torn apart as though a bunch of pissed off dogs had gone to town on it for a full day. Silently, I moved up the stairs. The smell, that horrible smell. It was so bad that I was even having trouble keeping my eyes open. I turned the corner to the parents' room and found the father. The shotgun was still in his mouth, at least where the mouth should be. The concussion of the 10 gauge had blown his head to pieces, leaving nothing to identify him. I stifled my vomit as I viewed the dried blood and brains sprayed across the back wall. The body had surprisingly slumped after the impact, sitting tall in the chair. I moved in a little and noticed the shape underneath the sheets. As I moved closer, I realized that the shape wasn't moving. I hoped and I prayed that I was wrong at what was there. I hoped that the empty pill bottles next to the half-empty bottle of liquor meant that someone was just in a temporary coma. I hoped that for once I could be wrong. Pulling the sheet back, I could see the wife's face. Her eyes were fixed and dilated with her mouth wide open. She looked right into my eyes, and for the briefest of moments I had hope. Then, as she didn't move, I realized that she was gone too. I tried to take a drink out of the bottle, but found myself coughing and gagging and pretty much halfway puking. As I dropped to the floor, I realized that this body just couldn't stomach alcohol anymore. On my hands, I looked at the empty prescription bottles and realized something. I didn't want to believe it. The bottles were filled with muscle relaxers, and weak ones at that. I picked up each of the bottles and read the side. Then that thought entered my brain, and I looked back up at her still frame. That was not the position of someone who died from an overdose. Turning to the headless corpse, I said, "You heartless bastard." Standing up, "You deserve far worse," I yelled at this headless corpse. I noticed the pillow with blood on it on the far side of the bed. He had smothered her once she was too weak to fight back. There was nothing for me in this room, so I went to check the other room. Upon entering, I saw them. I saw the cribs, 2 with pink and 1 with blue. I saw the fancy wooden cribs. Frilly sheets and soft mattresses lined them. I saw the cribs set up for a young boy and 2 little girls, placed strategically so someone could tend to one of them while not losing sight of the others. I saw the cribs with the soft toys on the outside edge so as to not get in the child's face at night. Fresh diapers in the corner next to the changing table, and a diaper genie, of course. I saw the cribs, and I saw the blood. The cribs were coated in dark, dried blood, with parts of the children still on the walls. I took a few steps forward as I prayed that this was just a hallucination and I would find them alive and well. Another step and I could see the boy, half formed into some sort of canine. The shot had gone through his torso, ripping him clean in half. His canine ears poking up and his mouth open, showing a still human tongue. His human arms spread out, laying next to his canine legs. Another step in, I could see one of the girls, well, sort of. The head and the upper torso were gone, splattered across the ground. The carnage must have been aimed down at her. What was left looked almost human. The only difference was the cat tail that protruded out of her lower back. A tail placed like mine was now unmoving next to the diaper and her human legs that were still intact. The last step, and I could see the last girl, broken in half like her brother. She seemed much more transformed. Nearly horse-like features that cleared her skull had extended out, and she had fully developed these horse ears. Her legs had changed too, into the front legs of a horse as well, completely, even with hooves. Though she didn't have any hair like a horse would, shows a baby's fair skin instead. I couldn't take it anymore. Rushing back into the master bedroom, I ripped a shotgun from the body and looked around for the remaining ammo. Found it easy and found a lot of it too, along with assorted other firearms. Looking through, I was only able to use 2 of them, the shotgun and the 500 Win Mag. Damn thing was like a hand cannon, so at least I could hold it. I brought the rest just in case, but doubted I'd be able to use any of it. Still, I didn't want anyone else to use it against me, though. I was able to make it into the final apartment before nightfall and found a few odds and ends, but nothing of serious note. Whomever lived there either didn't own much or really knew what they were doing when they left. Dinner that night had no flavor. I didn't even want to eat, but my body was telling me otherwise. Throughout the night, I couldn't get the images out of my head. Tossing and turning, I really wished I could at least drink. I found myself enraged at the idea of the guy killing his entire family. For what? I wanted to scream so badly. I wanted to hit something. I wanted that asshole to be alive so I could kill him myself. After wiping the shotgun off, I realized that if I held onto it any longer, I was probably going to use it and attract much more attention than I wanted. So, time to see what these improvements to my body can really do. I left from a couple apartments down, just in case, and started to move around. There wasn't much movement in the complex area, so I began to widen my search. Climbing trees in order to look around the area helped to search, but I couldn't find anything. Does nothing move at night anymore? I thought to myself. Eventually, I found myself near one of those big box stores. I don't know why it didn't hit me before, but this would be a prime hunting ground. I hung out and watched as a few people as they tried to cautiously move in and find supplies. As they did, they couldn't see the array of creatures that were using this as a modern-day watering hole. I watched as smaller ones skittered around and were spotted. These people might be stupid enough to come here at night, but not stupid enough to come unarmed. With each shot, the area got more and more chaotic. The large ones kept trying to move in without being seen, while the smaller ones were content with trying to eat the little critters already shot. This led to even more of them being shot, and then more coming in. It wasn't long before the humans ran back into their vehicles and tried to drive off. I say try. This is when a big one decided to make their move. They either dove at the small ones and tried to take out the other vehicles. One of them curled up like a human-sized armadillo and rolled into the side of one of the cars, forcing it to spin. As it unfurled itself, it found itself on the wrong side of a rifle barrel. Shots came flying out the window. I know that sound. Someone had a Kalashnikova. A 7.62 rounds punched right through the soft underbelly, and the creature fell to the ground convulsing. As the car peeled away, the body was swarmed by larger creatures. I don't even think it was dead yet once they started eating. As one of the creatures, the kind that looked like a human crossed with a jungle cat, ran in my direction with an arm of the fallen armadillo human thing, I figured if I was going to get my rage out, now is the time. Climbing partially down the tree, I could see it stop and enjoy its prize. I let it eat, as I'm not so much of a monster that I wouldn't let it enjoy its last meal. While watching, something else caught my eye. There was movement coming from the side. Something was coming to ruin this thing's meal. I froze in place as I watched it stalk closer. Kept trying to get a look at it, but this thing was smart. It stayed to the shadows and any concealment it could find. Analyzing its movements, it seemed to understand that it would be best chance if it attacked the kitty creature from behind. As the kitty took a really big piece of flesh and ripped it out, and started to enjoy a full belly, the new creature began to stalk even closer. It slowly moved out of the cover on a way to the big cat to try and minimize the distance to its prey before attacking. As it did, I could finally see what the hell it was. The spindly legs moved slowly into the light, the points of each being placed slowly as to not make any noise. Slowly, another leg came into view, moving with the same precision as the first. I then saw another leg, and another move into view. The body of a giant bug seemed to slowly move into view. The torso was surprisingly human, but the head, arms, insectoid abdomen coming out of its back, and its multiple legs were certainly not. It almost looked like a mantis, as those dagger-like arms, it continued to move forward, closing the gap between it and the kitty. Closing 20 feet. Another step with each of its long, spindly legs as it got closer. 16 feet. My pulse quickened as my muscles tensed. 12 feet. It began to slowly raise its arms in order to pierce the unsuspecting cat. 8 feet. It was in striking range now. If I was going to do anything, it had to be now. With a massive push from the tree, I lunged the 30 feet to my target. Thanks to my new power, I didn't have to adjust for the drop. Like a bullet, I flew into the insect creature with plenty of force to knock it over. Immediately, I tried to bite its head and quickly found out that its exoskeleton was far too tough for me to bite through. In my peripheral vision, I could see that it had scared the kitty so much that it had pissed itself. No time to worry about that now. The insect thrashed, and I tried to bite through the torso with minimal success. My claws were able to barely even scratch the damn thing, but my tail, that is what made sure I didn't get thrown off. My tail was firmly wrapped around the section between the human torso and the insect abdomen. It continued to thrash as I tried to find any weak spot. It was able to shift me around to the point that its leg jabbed mine. Though I didn't pierce me, it sure as hell didn't feel good. It must have seen me wince because it tried like hell to get me under so it could continue to pummel me. With this, my rage hit a new height. I reached down and grabbed one of its 6 legs and pulled as hard as I could. With a crack and a snap, the joint twisted and the leg broke clean off. The insect squealed with a mix of a falcon's call, a cat's pained scream, and a human's insurmountable pain. Looking at the leg I held in my hand, I realized that the joints were the weak spot. I proceeded to systematically rip off each of its appendages, starting with its legs, at least on one side. It must have known what I was doing because it immediately flipped and thrashed even harder than before. Crack, snap, another leg gone. Crack, snap, and that was the last one on the right side. Reaching around, I grabbed its slicing appendages and crack, snap. It screamed even louder than before. With it on the ground and its arm in my hand, I looked into its massive eyes, raised the arm and swung it as hard as I could. The arm insectoid sliced clean through the neck of its head and it fell to the ground. The body stayed upright for a few moments before going limp and dropping. Breathing heavy, I turned to the kitty. It was still there, in shock, holding the remains of the arm it had been eating. It was clearly emaciated, so I figured I would just leave it be. I might be hungry, but I was in no mood for another fight. Besides, it wouldn't be long before the scavengers come. Then I would have a fight on my hands. I picked up the arm of the bug and went to suck the muscle out from the inside. Then something I would immediately regret. The taste of it was so rancid, I puked right there and then. I could see the kitty confused at my reaction, but it didn't move. I looked at the bug and thought about who would want to eat this. Then a thought entered my mind. Oh shit. I'm sure a lot of things are on their way to eat this thing right now. I was about to leave when I realized something. The exoskeleton. It would make really good armor. If I can't claw my way through it or bite through it, then it has to be some really thick shellac. When I looked, it was surprisingly thin for how strong it was. Quickly, I went to work breaking off as much of the shell I could. I only got the front limbs of the insect abdomen, and one of the legs had broken off before I could hear something else was coming. It was others. I turned to run and saw the kitty had still not moved. I didn't look in his direction as I walked away and said, I would run if I were you. With that, I took off as fast as possible. I took the long way back as this thing was still leaking fluid all over the ground. I paused for a moment as the rain began to fall. At least this would cover up my scent a little bit, and the scent of this damn thing. I again took the long way back, but I found some discarded trash bags from a house that had been raided and put the parts inside. Now at least I will stop oozing all this junk all over me. You would think that the first thing I would do when I got back would be to wash off. Nope. I had to get something with flavor on my tongue before I barfed again. That this was just so far beyond rancid. Ugh. Once I cleansed my palate and got cleaned up, it was time to get to work. The shell was even harder to work with than I thought. I cursed out loud as my trauma shears snapped in half, trying to get this thing into manageable pieces. I tried ripping them barehanded, but to no avail. Eventually, I was able to work with a set of tin snips to get what I needed. Now, with so little to work with, I had to use it sparingly. I'm not a great craftsman either, so I will admit it, I wasn't able to use it all. I focused on the most likely areas in which the enemy might attack, so my tail was partially covered with strips of shellac. They were woven, leaving at least 2-inch gaps. There was more along the lines of protecting my tail from being sliced than anything else. I did the same to my long neck, since after this many fights I knew that my neck was the best point of attack. I had to use the same type of webbing as my tail, not only because of the limited amount of material, but also because I needed to be able to keep my dexterity. I was able to sculpt a small piece for my head too, but this one was one solid piece. There was also more than enough to give me some chest and back protection. The one in the back attached to the tail section to just keep it in place and keep the tail section from falling off. I had to segment the chest piece because it just didn't fit right at first. Eventually, I was able to make it work for me. A couple small pieces for my forearms and legs, and of course, I had to protect the soft area. The only things left were the razor-sharp bug arms. These I turned into makeshift swords, though not as long as I would like to have, but they turned out better than I expected. Cut myself a few times making them, too. This turned out to take several days of no sleep, just breaks to eat and drink. About 90% of the way through, I got a reminder that this world was still going nuts. The power went out. It didn't bother me any since I could see just fine in the dark. What does concern me, though, was my depleting provisions. Though I had cleared out all the other apartments on one side, I'm finding myself low on food again. It was time to start going to the other side and see what else I could find. Working methodically like I'd done before on my way to the next apartment. This one had some rations, but not much. As I was transporting things back to my apartment building, I could have sworn I heard something else moving around. I didn't pay much attention, as I was busy trying to keep myself provisioned. When I knocked on the wall to the apartment on the far end, I was surprised to hear tapping back. I had to get my printout of Morse code so I could figure out what he was saying. That turned out to be a waste of time because it wasn't Morse code. It was prison code. I had to draw it out in order to actually understand what he was saying, and eventually got the message, "Are you human?" I wanted to answer honestly, so I responded, "My mind is." There was a long pause, and when I tried to say something else, I heard something I didn't want to. Shots rang out, and bullets began to come through the wall. One grazed my neck, while another one ricocheted off the bog armor. I dove to the side and out of the way as the shots stopped, and the wall started getting kicked down. Guess he figured he weakened it enough with that little pistol. Wrong. He ended up using some piece of metal to break through and try to get to me. I was off to the side, watching and waiting. Waiting for this paranoid asshole to try and hurt me again. Thankfully, the grazing wound wasn't deep at all, and a quick patch job took care of it. He started breaking wood out of the way as I watched, thinking, all the creatures I fought, and I get hurt by a blind spot through the wall. Seriously, a blind shot. Ugh. with the hole finally big enough to stick his arms and his upper torso through. I grabbed his arms and pulled him through the rest of the way. He started screaming as I pinned him down and tried to get the pistol out of his hand. He was thrashing and had a death grip on that pistol. I finally took a few cracks to the head to get him to let go of it. I let him go, yelling, "That's enough!" He rolled over, holding his head, looking confused that I had just spoke. The 9mm in my hand was so small in my hand that I knew it wouldn't be any use to me. I hit the button and dropped the magazine, eject the round from the chamber, and separated the upper and lower receivers. A practice maneuver. Dropping it to the ground, the man's dark skin turned gray as the blood rushed out of his face. Here he is, injured on the floor, looking up at a 9-foot-tall, broad and muscular creature that looked like something from one of those god-awful RPGs. The insect armor probably didn't help things much. I spoke. "Relax. If I wanted to kill you, you'd be dead." He didn't seem convinced until I lowered my hand to help him up. He hesitantly took my hand as I stood up. He talked for a minute before he ended up telling me something strange. "Yeah, when all this started off, my wife changed too," he said. "Really? Into what?" I asked. "Into some strange bug thing. Scary and disgusting thing she turned out to be." He responded, shivering a little as he continued. "Definitely wouldn't want to fuck that," he replied. I asked him for a photo, and my suspicions were confirmed. I turned to him and asked, "So, is that why you killed her?" His face turned gray again. In an attempt to look confused, he asked, "What? Why would you ask that? I didn't kill her. She ran away." Seething in anger, I said, "She was running away from you. I heard the whole thing." Straightening up and looked him right in the eyes. "She begged you not to kill her. She was running away from you." Her partially turned body was unable to even walk correctly as she tried to get away. He was clearly nervous as I continued. "Even worse, you didn't even have the decency or the balls to bury her. Instead, you left her out there to be eaten by whatever the hell is roaming in this area. Because of that, another creature got strong enough to almost take out an entire family. If you hadn't been there, the entire family, father, mother, kids, would have been lunch for this thing." He was reaching for his pistol. I concluded with, "Go back to your place. Collect your things and leave." He looked at the window with just as much fear as he had for me. "I will make sure you can leave. Now, go." Making sure I punctuated the point and pointed towards the hole in the wall. He left, and I found my way to the outside and waited. He came out with several loads of supplies for his car. I shook my head, seeing him bring his gaming system out. Whatever, as long as he's gone is all I could think. My rage still simmering as he finished up. I would have killed him if it wasn't for the fact that in those few days of confusion, bad things just happened to everyone. I couldn't hold that against him too much. What I can do is get him as far away from me as possible. He closed the back of his car and looked at me sitting in the bushes. He took a deep breath and said, "Well, I get..." He didn't have time to finish. What looked like a tentacle reached out from the side of the building and grabbed him. It pulled him up with such speed that I almost didn't even have time to react. I dove forward and had to look up to see a human-sized, was it gecko? Human? I was having trouble figuring out what the hell I'm looking at. With this guy in his mouth. The guy was clearly hurt, but very much alive. The gecko saw me and thought I saw it smile as it turned away. I guess it didn't know who it was messing with. I wasn't going to let my rage take over the guy. The creature was fair game, though. Jumping up, I was able to get my claws in the side of the building and began to quickly crawl at it. The gecko heard the noises and turned back as the guy screamed in panic inside this thing's mouth. Soon, it would be the gecko's turn. By the time it had turned its head, I was already in striking distance. I grabbed a hold of it and sunk my claws deep in as they could go, and then went for the neck. Its stubby, fat neck. It thrashed for sure and dropped the guy on the ground. The guy landed with a sickening thump as he had fallen from the roof, but it clearly sounded worse than it actually was. He got up and sprinted/limped to his vehicle. I couldn't care less since I was busy dealing with our unwelcomed visitor. I couldn't get more of a mouthful out of this thing as it deliberately rolled and dropped to the ground from the roof, finding me on the bottom. I'll admit that really hurt, but my claws were in far too deep to let go. I wrapped my tail around the base of its tail as it flipped its tail back, striking me in the back several times with a force that was out of control fire hose. I was finally able to get into position and got my claws on the front of its neck. It reached up to try and stop my hands, but it only got a hold of my right arm. I sunk my claws in deep and pulled them as hard as I could, and fast as I could across its neck. If it could have screamed before, surely it couldn't now. The blood sprayed across the lawn, reaching the road more than 25 feet away. I stayed on top of it while it thrashed and began to gurgle on its own blood. The blood looked like it had a strange purple shade to it. Not the sort of thing you see from an arterial bleed. Definitely not. Once it stopped moving, I double-checked to make sure that it was zeroed out and picked up the entire thing and headed for the secondary entrance of my lair. It took a bit of power to get this big amphibian into my apartment building so I could butcher the damn thing. I stopped 2 apartments away because I realized that I didn't have power anymore and I need to preserve as much as possible. It wasn't a big fight, so I wasn't dying of hunger at the moment. I was able to make a makeshift smoker out of large portions, and just like the gator and the tail was packed with meat. The arms were not nearly as meaty as the gator, so they would be dinner tonight. At least some fresh meat would be a welcome treat. While cleaning it out, I couldn't help but to snack. The organs all went down smooth, and I was so glad I didn't have to chew the intestines, because that would have turned my snack into a pretty shitty lunch. The liver, in particular, was a true treat of any creature, probably due to its extremely high nutrient value. Though this creature had a little extra that surprised me. The skin. The skin was bursting with flavor. I wasn't going to eat it, but I gave it a taste, and down the hatch it went. I stayed close to the smoker all night since I didn't know what might be able to smell the meat and not just the smoke. Just smoke is enough to make most animals run, as it's a sign of imminent danger. I figured the creatures would be the same, but you can't be safe enough these days. Not at all. It was about dawn when I heard something from one of the other far apartments. It was clearly glass breaking, but from what? I made my way to the next apartment and then went looking. Eventually, I ended up in the apartment with the kids and the cribs. I could hear movement upstairs and found myself shivering at the idea of what I might find. When I turned the corner, my stomach turned over as well. There was the kitty from before, but it wasn't alone. There was another cat-ish feline creature in there too. Neither of them looked really human. They looked as though feline CGI, anthropomorphic, almost as disturbing as that god-awful movie that was made from an even worse musical back in the day. But there was no true humanity left, at least on the surface, except in the way they looked at us. The original one was eating the woman in the bed, while the other was eating the headless guy. The idea alone of eating a 2-week-old corpse was enough to turn even the strongest stomachs, but seeing it live was another thing altogether. I was watching for a few moments they tore into the bodies, like someone who hadn't eaten within a week was just given a sandwich. The breaking of bones and the slurping of blood and organs made me want to roll my eyes and barf, though that was nothing due to the smell. Decaying flesh combined with ruptured organs that had been festering for over 2 weeks. They must be hungry if they can swallow that and not vomit. After a few seconds, the one I've never seen before noticed me and hissed. This got the attention of the other, who then looked up into my eyes. It saw who I am and motioned to the other one to calm down. This told me that it was smart, or at least smart enough to know not to challenge something like me. I looked back and forth at both of them, and they took up positions to protect their meal. I simply said, "You are trespassing. Finish your meal and leave." With that, I turned and walked away. It took less than a minute to once again hear them start ripping into the rotten flesh again. I shivered at the thought and went back. Each time I crossed from one apartment to the other, I sealed up the hole as best I could, setting breakable items up high as an early warning to any potential vagrants. After checking the smoker, I did the same on the other side. It would be a sleepless night as I waited for everything to be done. At least I had plenty to eat while I waited. The tail meat was particularly yummy. In the morning, I was finishing up and started to feel something familiar. Pain radiating through my body told me it was going to be one of those days where things were going to get interesting. The sudden influx of hunger pains, even though I'd just eaten, made me eat the rest of the creature from yesterday. So much for saving it for later. And following it was several gallons of water. The last thought I had before basically going into a coma was, great, now I have to get more supplies. I woke up in the spare room. How I got there? No idea. The only thing I did know is that my body ached. I ached like I've not moved in days. How long was I out? Oh crap, did anyone break in? I jumped to my feet as my muscles fought me. I was glad I wasn't wearing any of my armor, though I had to wonder when I took it off. After getting another large drink of water, I started looking around. The place was disheveled, but not ransacked. More of the food and water was gone, but not enough to make me panic. Trying to flick the sleep from my eyes, I decided to stretch and get the blood flowing again. When I bent down, I received a shock. My tail had increased in length. I'm guessing about 55%. I ran to the bathroom to see what else had changed. Fearing the worst, I pulled open the other door to get as much light in as possible, and I was surprised that not much had changed. Breathing a sigh of relief, I noticed that my hide was a little different. Now, not sure how, just kind of looked off. My tail may be longer, but it was also thinner than before. I found myself hoping that it didn't mean that I lost power in it. With the shock worn off, I moved to clean up the mess. It was clear that I had sleepwalked since the claw marks on the sides of the cupboards were clearly mine. Oh God, what happened to me? For the next few days, I worked on adjusting my armor and making plans and preparations for another run for supplies. The thought was daunting since by now most of the areas had been picked clean. I would have to go out really far to get any remaining food, but my much bigger concern was water. I was nearly out. With as many containers as I could, I got ready to make consecutive runs. There was a river about a mile away. If I go through the woods, I can cut the distance in half. I would have to go at night to avoid detection. To fully fill my reserves, I would have to make another dozen trips in one night. This was going to be a long-ass night. I started as soon as the sun went down. Running on all fours made me move much faster, and that is what I wanted. And in this case, speed equaled security. I could make it to the river in about 4 minutes at full speed, while it took about 10 minutes to fill the containers safely, and another 3 to get them strapped on my back, and another 4 minutes back. Adding the 5 minutes to empty the containers and strap them back on was making the round trip less than a half an hour. To make sure I wouldn't have to do this again, I would continue until either I ran out of night or filled my reserves. At least, that was the plan. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I began to slow down. I was blowing through calories and not replacing them with anything. I pushed through the pain and kept getting the water I needed so badly. While filling up, I would stick my head into the water and get as much as I could to stem off the hunger pains while keeping hydrated. Getting close to complete, I could see the first glimmer of dawn approaching. This would be my final run of the night. Once full of water, I took off like a shot. I got back and basically collapsed. Grabbing a quick bite to eat, I realized that my ration levels were at critical levels. But at least my water issue was taken care of. The next night, I went out with a pack and full intentions not to come back until I had sufficient food to last me a week at least. I had to, since the last of my rations were in my bag. There just wasn't anything left. I started systematically, as I would go out about a half a mile or so and climb the tallest tree I could find. This would give me a vantage point from which I could survey the area. Not a lot was moving around at night. It seemed as I went up the one tree after another. Everything was still and quiet. So very quiet. Usually that meant a predator was in the area. Maybe they meant me. Though, after all that's happened, you would think I would expect the unexpected. Wait, what is that? Are those headlights?